Hey there. Welcome. Welcome to my little yoga world. I'm going to be talking today about helping students who feel triggered by breathing cues. Thank you for joining me. I'll just wait a couple of moments here as things get rolling, because sometimes people join late and then have questions. So I just like to wait for a few moments, maybe like a minute or so. But let me know if you're here. Let me know if you have questions. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk today about breathing cues in yoga. So, as a yoga professional, what kind of cues do you give people about breathing, and when those cues cause feelings of anxiety, what you can do about it? Okay. Okay. So, welcome. If you just joined my Facebook group, welcome. It's nice to have you here. If you're a regular student, longtime student, nice to see you again. So this week I was asked a question which I've been asked before, and I've dealt with or helped people deal with for many years, which is this question of breathing cues and what to do when breathing cues cause anxiety. Because sometimes to ask somebody to take a deep breath is a really anxiety provoking cue. And you would think, gosh, all I did was ask them to take a deep breath. People are always saying things like, like take a deep breath. So why is that a problem? Why does that cause problems for some people? And so really what we have to understand is the nervous system. I mean, it's all about the nervous system, and I'd like to be really clear that my teaching, there's many wonderful people out there that teach in terms of biomechanics, and biomechanics are great, but that's not the core of my teaching. My teaching is about the nervous system and how you can optimize the function of the nervous system. Now, of course, there's overlap with those two things, no doubt, but the focus for me is helping people with mental emotional challenges, and therefore the nervous system is the place to go. Okay, well, the neuroendocrine system, but let's talk about the nervous system to start with. So in terms of what happens when people have traumatic events in their lives, not everybody, but some people will respond by creating a breathing patterning that was appropriate during that traumatic event. So it might have been some kind of breath holding. This can also happen with things like asthma, because asthma is a traumatic event, right? You don't know that you're going to be able to survive because you're not being able to breathe. So the idea here, or the challenge, is that we develop these breathing patterns. Those breathing patterns become kind of etched into the nervous system, and they live below the level of consciousness, right? They're intrinsic. They live deep in the systems of the body that are connected to the brainstem largely. And the brainstem and the front brain don't communicate that much. So you can tell yourself, oh, I'm just going to take a deep breath and relax. Or I just heard that cue from my yoga teacher to take a deep breath and relax. And you can take a deep breath, and then the nervous system can go, like I don't want you to do that. That's not okay, because you're messing with the survival mechanisms. When you mess with the survival mechanisms, the system often will push back against you because it's set up that way in order to maintain your survival. And it had been set up that way during some kind of a traumatic or event, which may or may not be available to conscious memory. And so I have spent a lot of time. I still work with clients who have anxiety and trauma histories and addiction histories often. And so one of the things I realized, particularly for the purposes of teaching, because I train a lot of yoga professionals and mental health professionals, and one of the things I realized is that I had to develop a system for helping people to get into their bodies and to get into their breath. And so I've outlined that system in a blog that I wrote this week, but I'll talk about it a little bit here. So the first thing that you do is establish a sense of safety, so that people are feeling like they like to come and be with you and they feel safe being with you, and you're not, well, they might not like it, but I mean, they might be like, oh, I have to go do that work, but at least they have the sense of like, this is good for me and I feel safe here. Because without that sense of safety, what you're asking people to do is contradictory to what their nervous system is doing. So the nervous system is going into a place of hyper arousal, like, am I okay? Is everything okay? And it's not okay, and therefore I can't relax. So then a breathing cue is just completely out of the question at that point. So you create a safe space. And one of the things I've noticed is like put the mats up against the wall for people. So when I've worked with small groups, like of 6 to 8 people, and often in a small space, but still we have enough space that everybody in the room could take their mat, if not the long end, then the short end of the mat. And having your back to the wall is often a place of like, I'm good. There's nothing behind. I'm good. And I can see where the door is, those sorts of things, even though consciously, everything's fine. I'm just in yoga class. In terms of the nervous system and those intrinsic or those subconscious processes, often the nervous system is going to be much more able to calm down when the room feels safe. I know I can mess with the lights, I can mess with the temperature, I can mess with the position in my room. And if I'm the student having that agency, then I'm going to feel safer in the situation. So those are all sorts of things. And also lots of options of what is asked of me, right? And I know that the teacher might say, take a deep breath, but I know I can ignore that. I know I don't have to comply with everything she's asking me to do. That's really an important place to start. So I start with that safety, and then I take people into movement. Then it may be the Pawan Mukta Asana stuff. It might be some joint rotations. It might be simple seated postures, little tiny twists. It might be some neck stretches and lots of different options. And then I could do a whole class, or I may do a whole year of classes for somebody that is just based on let's start feeling the body. And this is much more about proprioception and less about interoception, right? So where is my body in space? How does my body feel? Am I in charge of my body? Can I do all the movements in my body that I want to do? Does it feel good to move my body? Those sorts of things, that movement orientation is the first place to start, not breath orientation. I've been trained in Vinyasa Yoga. I love breath-centric practice. I'm really into working with my breath. But what I know is from working with people with trauma histories that that's not the first place to go. Right? Take a deep breath is not the first thing for everybody. So we start with safety in the room. Then we move to this movement orientation. Then I'll start taking people into a sensation orientation. It might not be just like this tsunami of sensations, but it may be, how does it feel to flex your hand? And how does it feel to extend your hand? How does it feel to flex your hand? How does it feel when you extend your arm? How does it feel when you move into a side bend? And do you notice sensations in the space between your ribs? All of those little tiny sensation cues. And it could just be a few for the group. It doesn't have to be a lot. That starts getting us into being okay with feeling sensations in our body. So we've moved from proprioception to interoception. And by the way, those are hierarchical in terms of our evolution of who we are as human beings, and also in terms of the capacity. So proprioception is you have to have proprioception. Like you have to be able to walk down the street and not fall down, not trip over something. You have to be able to get through life, not bump into everything in your house. That's proprioception. And then interoception starts going into the sensations, the felt sense of the body. So important because it starts taking us closer to a sense of identity. And I'll talk about that in another live stream. But let's go to the next level. So we went movement orientation, then sensation orientation. Then at the end of sensation orientation, I could start saying things like, and do you notice movement in your chest as you're doing your asanas? Do you notice as we're sitting here that there's a movement and feelings in the chest, maybe in the armpits? And of course, that's the feeling of the breath. So before I ask somebody to take a deep breath, how about if I just notice that I'm breathing? That is a better avenue into the breath than saying take a deep breath or let's breathe fully or diaphragmatically or whatever, particularly for people with trauma histories. So starting to get into the movement and the sensation of the breath. And then my fourth orientation, right? I went safety, movement, sensation. And then my fourth orientation is going to be the breath orientation. And why I definitely want to get to breath orientation. Why? Because the breath is the link into the autonomic nervous system. So that's where we can start to make changes in the system, is with the breath. So I want to get people to the breath, but I can never expect people to get there right away. And anyone, not even people with only people with explicit trauma histories, but anyone, I can't expect anyone to get there right away. I gently can guide them and offer some a roadmap. I can offer a map of how to get there. And that's what I hope this is for you. And then I suggest there's a fifth orientation, and that's the spiritual orientation. And if that word is too triggering, as it may be for some people, particularly those who've been traumatized by people purporting to espouse a certain religion, then we can talk about a supportive presence, or we can talk about interconnectedness and interdependency of all things. That kind of language. However, we get to somebody to this idea that everything is interconnected, and I'm supported by that interconnectedness. I'm supported by that interdependency. There's a supportive presence in my life. However we can get there is going to help people feel really safe and be able to take this journey with us into the core of themselves. Okay, so as I wrap up here, I'm not quite wrapped up, but as we move to the next section here, what I want to do is show you a couple of things you can do in that first stage, that safety stage. And it's kind of integrating sensations and movement, and safety is kind of integrating. But this is something I've been using regularly for a long time, and it's activating what's called the orienting response. So the orienting response in the system is that part of our system that helps us to know where we are in a room and to feel safe. So you're activating what's called exteroception, that part of myself that kind of like connects with everything around me and feels like, okay, I'm good, I'm here, I can move to some of this other work, proprioception and then the interoception. So here's a couple things I like to teach. So one of them is simple neck stretch. So you can sit up tall, take a breath in, eyes stay open, and then shift your eyes over to the right and let your head follow your eyes around, scanning the room. And then scan the eyes over to the left and let your head follow your eyes around, scanning the room, seeing what's far, seeing what's close, seeing how far you can stretch your eyes behind you. So you can turn the eyes first and then let your head follow around. So this is activating this orienting response. The other reason that it's activating is because the atlas and the axis sitting on top of each other, the first two bones in the cervical spine, they're starting to create this kind of movement on each other, and that stimulates the nerves coming out that are related to this, related to the parasympathetic part of the nervous system. Like, am I able to go into that relaxation response? So that's one place I do it. You could also do it with a twist, like inhale, and then taking one hand to the opposite side and letting the eyes scan around. Maybe not inhale, maybe just slow fluid movement, right? Sometimes we use those breathing cues really, almost, unconsciously as yoga teachers. So it could just be smooth fluid movement. The other way I like to do twist is just like this, with the arms coming up and down. Hi. My cat came to join us. Okay, so those are some ways you can access that orienting response of looking around the room. Here's another way you could do it. If you were in, sorry, Kitty, I have to go over here. If you were doing a supine pose, like either a twist or Apanasana if you're on your back. Here's another, I'll do it with Apanasana so you can see. So I'll do like turn my head to the side with the eyes open as the knees come in, and then come back to neutral, and turn my head to the other side. So this kind of movement slowly back and forth with eyes wide open, checking out everything in the room, all the lights, all the colors, all the shapes. You can add a little sound in there too. Checking out sound isn't a bad thing. So those are just a couple of ideas of ways that I like to tap into the orienting response so that you're working not only with this, like, I'm consciously safe in the space, but also you're using the nervous system to help establish those feelings of safety. Thank you so much for being here. I see that there are some comments, but it's mostly just, I don't see any questions, mostly just names and hello. So hello to everybody. Thank you for being here. I'll be back next week. Please feel free to put your questions in the Facebook group if you're in my Facebook group. If you're not in my Facebook group, you can ask to join. It's called the Subtle Yoga Community. Please feel free to put questions in there, because that gives me ideas about what to do for these Friday live streams and what you're interested in. I want to help in any way that I can to make your work with yoga students or with clients, if you're a mental health professional, a little easier, and give you some ideas of how you can use these practices with your students and clients. Thank you for being here. See you next week. Namaste.